proposal. That developer even quoted it 3 times at a public information meeting. Developer also indicated that, in fact, although the tenants didn't have to be notified of a public information meeting, that he let the tenants notify. It notified the tenants himself, and that the tenants were in support of this proposal. I want you to know that this in myself is absolutely shocking, because what was stated is that the tenants actually had no rights. They were not homeowners, and as a result of not being homeowners, they had no say. They didn't have to be informed. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, the tenants are, in fact, individual homeowners in those units. The tenants do, in fact, pay the property taxes, the water bill, the heating cost, because that's an accumulative cost that is added in to their unit costs. And when they rent that unit cost is put in there. Don't ever think that it is borne by the developer, because it is not. It is a fallacy in which I didn't recognize that in fact existed within the HRM, and I don't know if it exists within all 55 units within this, municipal units within this province. But if it does, I recommend to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, or my colleague who in fact is the critic for municipal affairs and municipal relations and consumer services, that in fact he craft a piece of legislation that enshrines those rights to all citizens when it comes to with respect to having public participation in the development of their community. Because if they don't, Mr. Speaker, what happens is people who live in apartment buildings have no say. Yet the land, when the planning department develops the land, they say it's consistent with adjacent units. So their windows can be blocked off, their scenery, their view, their vista, all of that can be blocked off by a development in which they actually have no say. And I say shame on HRM planning department, because they are ones who I know in fact carry this practice out and have the gall to say, in this day and age, because of technology, there is no way of providing that information to people. When I say there is a way of providing that information to people, because there are such things as postal walks, and the postal walks can do that. Mr. Speaker, I have sent a letter off to the minister responsible for housing, and the minister responsible for housing is very much aware of my position. As I have stated, 61% of the housing stock that exists in Dartmouth North exists as multi-unit residential developments. Another shocking example to this legislative assembly will be that the population, the senior population of Dartmouth North is 8%. Now you tell me how that develops healthy communities. And that's a direct result of a former Minister of Community Services by the name of Rolly Thornhill developing all the housing stock in Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, excuse me for saying so, when he was a minister. Now, there is only one 15-unit senior citizens housing unit in all of Dartmouth. The minister had an opportunity to allow a 15-unit housing stock going on the property which was owned by the province of Nova Scotia in Lancaster Ridge. They chose to take that off the market, allow the municipality to rezone that into single-family residential development. Even though I served on the council and that development agreement was to allow that stock to continue there. It's this kind of thing that causes unhealthy communities. It's this kind of, planning can talk, and maybe I'll get a day to talk on this very issue someday about healthy communities and neighborhoods or whatever, when legislation comes to this office, if it's not this legislative assembly, if it's not before I retire, that I'll speak about, the significant role of planning departments with respect to developing healthy communities, and why, at the end of the day, it ends up having to be policed by policing services, simply because it has not planned appropriately healthy communities. And I do know that when I look at this brochure that was passed before us, Mr. Speaker, and I know there's no props allowed, but it talked about healthy communities for a healthy future by the Cumberland Health Authority. I can only wish in the constituency of Dartmouth North that that day will come, and it will happen. Mr. Speaker, the minister and every member of this legislative assembly needs to know that I am not against affordable housing, that I am in support of affordable housing, even though I know that that affordable housing will probably get developed by developers who are trading on the stock market and whom, in fact, are getting $25,000 per unit from that grant and only have to keep it for 15 years and then chuck the people out or put the rental increases. I also know that the maximum for those two-bedroom units that are allowable under the social services program is $650. And yet, those units are going for $795. Now you tell me who we are trying to help and assist through the housing programs in this province. I want to say that I have acknowledged the kind of statistical information that my new colleague had brought forward with respect to my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid had brought forward with respect to the new statistical numbers on the housing stock that's available and that the minister has developed in this province. I want to say that the developer argued about the vacancy rate being in the metro area of 2.9%. Well, I have to tell you that he might be correct, but I had already identified areas that had an 80% vacancy rate. I have identified an area which has at least 20 or 30% vacancy rate. There's ample opportunity to develop decent, affordable housing, and housing that people can have equity in. People who know. We talked about equity in co-op housing. I've talked to the minister about this. I've talked to the minister about equity in modest housing programs, bringing about additional dollars and giving that to someone whom, in fact, is going to build a modest housing program, that $25,000. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's important to recognize that there are a tremendous number of housing needs. Every one of us who represent constituencies across this province know full well by the phone calls that come through our office the number of seniors who want seniors housing, who are on a waiting list for seniors housing, the number of people who are on a waiting list to get into public housing simply because of the in-migration of the population coming to Halifax has caused rental rates to skyrocket, and has skyrocketed to such a point whereby people can't afford it. And I do know that my honorable leader from Cole Harbour had talked about people spending their food allotment to offset the cost of their shelter component. And that happens far too frequently. And it happens even when the rates, it has happened even when the rates of heating and fuel costs have not climbed. Many of those individuals have had to supplement their incomes. And yet they have to walk down the street in total embarrassment. Not only are they in poverty, but total embarrassment to a food bank and carry the bags back. You know, we live in a society that, you know, a country that has only 34 million people. We live in a province with less than 1 million people. That's what we live in. Yet we can't provide decent, affordable, healthy living, be that communities, health, or whatever. Less than 1 million people. We have amassed a debt of some $11 billion plus. And yet we expect those people, the most vulnerable, to carry the burden. Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you that I've been here for approximately 7.5 years. I don't see a future of that changing unless somebody decides to take an investment into communities and into people of this province. We can talk the talk, and we can say we're doing these things, and we have to do them within the resources that we have. We can talk that talk, and I listen to it every day as I sit in this legislative assembly, as I look out the window to what the constituency that I represent and the needs of those people. I watch government in action. I have watched it at the municipal level and the provincial level for approximately 18 years. I have watched what they do. The path of least resistance seems to be the way in which to go. And that's exactly the reason why we have what we have today. That's the reason why we have communities that are stigmatized, like North Dartmouth, like Uniacke Square, like Caledonia Kennedy Drive, like Greystone. You name those areas. It's got to do with the way they were developed and the housing stock that was placed in them. It seems as though it's okay to build housing for people as long as they're concentrated in a particular area. Out of mind, out of sight. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that there comes a day when the utilization of the taxpayer's purse is at the most advantageous. The utilization of how you spend those dollars to get the maximum return. How you reduce the cost to health care services. How you reduce the cost of penal institutions. How you reduce the cost of education. How you reduce the cost of community service. It's all about health, and the component of shelter is in fact one of those components that in fact reflects and helps that reduce. Because if people have healthy shelters, they have a healthy place to live, then in fact those costs will be significantly reduced. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that I was honored to have the minister that day with me, and I want to say that the minister has spent approximately about 45 minutes to an hour driving with myself and the chairperson of Neighborhood Watch. And I want to say that I was amazed at how receptive the minister was to our concerns. I want to tell you that I told the minister that the constituency of Dartmouth North can no longer be the parking lot for all the social entities that municipal, provincial, and federal governments try to address. I would just want to tell you the kind of housing stock that we have in the constituency of Dartmouth North, just to show you that we carry our burden and our share of the needs for social development. We have public housing units, we have supervised apartments, we have small options homes, we have not-for-profit organizations, we have co-op housing, we have addiction centers, we have rehab correction facilities, we have associations for women's residential facilities. As a matter of fact, most recently lifted a blanket on a protected area to allow that to expand. I don't know how much further anyone in government at all levels can expect us to go. I can tell you, as I've told the minister, we're open and receptive, and that money for affordable housing can be put into revitalization of those boarded up buildings that presently exist in my community, and that in fact they do have the opportunity to utilize the existing facilities which are now underutilized. Mr. Speaker, as I stand here, it gave me the great opportunity to speak to the Housing Development Corporation bill here. And the reason why it gave me that great opportunity to speak to this Bill 230 is because although you have an auditor, at least hopefully that auditor will do an audit on the existing housing stocks throughout the entire province of Nova Scotia and to address the housing needs appropriately, and maybe work closely with the municipal units and their planning departments on how to develop healthy communities. Maybe that will be part of an audit that exists within this audit development. I think that it is unfair of the approach of government with its dollars and its bags of money since I came here in 1998. It has had revenue passed down to it from the federal government of Canada, which this government is still trying to tax itself on how to spend those monies. And the reason why it's taxing itself on how to spend that money is because it's all political. All that money is political. It means that, when election time comes, we can make these announcements. Or if there's a by-election, or if there happens to be an area that is covered by a member of that House on that side of the government. Just look at the dollars and where they flow. Hopefully, not only the financial audit, but there will be an audit on where that money has gone and how that money has been spent. Excuse me. That doesn't happen to be an idea of mine. It happened to be something that was stated when the honourable member from Halifax Fairview had spoken, that he had indicated that not only the financial audit, but there ought to be an audit of the housing stock as well, and I think that that's quite appropriate. If I have become concerned about housing, it's because I've represented a constituency where I have not only lived it, my residents have. And to me, there needs to be a complete review of what's happening. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I could stand here for another 45 minutes, and I don't know if I should actually sit down or not, but I think that I might reserve some of my conversation on this very issue for another day. So I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. I recognize the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't take up too much time, but I felt compelled to get up because of the situation in my own riding involving housing. And I've listened to the speakers here with great interest today. And I guess it would be fairly easy to come to the conclusion when the best that this government can bring forward is a couple of lines in a bill to do an audit. Have you run out of ideas entirely that you have to take up the time of this House with this? Do you understand the situation that exists in our province in terms of housing? Do you understand that we are getting dozens and dozens of requests as MLAs at our offices from people who are willing to give up their homes that they own because they can't afford to heat them this winter? Do you realize what's going on, Mr. Speaker? Does that minister have any idea of what's happening in this province? That the strangest thing happens when you get a request from a person looking for affordable housing, for decent housing. And there's nothing wrong with the idea of decent, affordable housing. It's not too much to ask for in Nova Scotia today.
Order. I wonder if the honourable member would allow for an introduction.
Well, I'm just getting rolling, Mr. Speaker. But I will, yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me just tremendous delight to rise in this legislature today and to introduce some special guests in the Speaker's Gallery. Joining us today is His Excellency David Reddaway, who is the British High Commissioner to Canada. He is joined by Mr. Fred Smithers, who is the British Honorary Consul in Halifax, and a guest of particular interest to me, not that the Council isn't, and that not, is a Dennis Nams, who is a grade 12 high school student at CEC, I might add a constituent of my good friend from Colchester North, who is the winner of the Trafalgar 200 essay competition organized by the British Council, and accompanied by teacher Beth McMichael, and I believe the social studies consultant is Bruce Fisher is also there with him. Now I'd like them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the host, and congratulations. Thank you.
And indeed, a warm welcome to our special guests in Province House today. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This would probably seem mild compared to the British House of Commons, but we'll take it from there. As I was saying, there is nothing wrong with the idea of decent, affordable housing in this province. It's not too much to ask. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, what the strange thing that happens is when a person comes into your office as an MLA and they have a complaint about housing, and I've run into this in a number of instances, they'll say, the housing people told me I make too much money. I make too much money and I didn't qualify for the program. But insert the name of your MLA, whomever it may be, they'll say, how do I make too much money when I'm at the poverty line and I don't qualify for one of these programs? And there are huge waiting lists for these programs that people involved with the housing will tell you. We waited a year, we waited a year and a half, whatever the case may be. I'm looking for, and the person who comes in with the request says, I've been on a list for over a year, and all I'm looking for is decent housing. I need housing now. And Dave, in my case, or whomever, I've driven by this street and I've seen vacant units, vacant family units, vacant duplexes that are boarded up. People could be living there. I could be living there. Please, you're my MLA, do something to help me. And here we are, you know, in this tremendous legislative chamber that we sit in whenever we sit to deal with very important items, and the best that this government can put forward is an audit. An audit. Tell me how that helps the senior who walked into my office last week and said, I'm thinking about selling my home. Can you help me get a senior citizens unit somewhere in Glace Bay? Please. Tell me how that audit is going to help that senior. The existing housing stock that is there now is in disrepair. But yet the first thing this government, and here's a reminder for those that don't know, the first thing that this government did when they first came to power in 1999 was cancel the Winter Works Program. A program that was used to repair existing housing stock and to bring it up to date and to put people back into their homes. Out the window went the Winter Works Program right away. So what you have left now is a deteriorating housing stock, which, by the way, nobody's going to do an audit on. They're not, if I read this bill correctly, it's not an audit of housing stock, okay? It's just a money audit. That would actually make sense if you were going to do an audit of the housing stock, because then you could, no pun intended, take stock of what you have in housing and look at it and put some money, and that's what's needed here, Mr. Speaker, is put some funds forward, if you're serious, to help people in this province who are losing their homes now on a daily basis because that government won't do anything about rising oil prices, which are going to just devastate some people this winter, Mr. Speaker. That's what's happening here. As I mentioned, when those citizens walk into your office, you feel entirely helpless because you know this issue has been brought up by both opposition parties every session of this legislature since that government came to power. Not one session has gone by that the subject of housing has not been brought up on the floor of this chamber. And not once has the government paid any attention to what either party, regardless of party, tear down the political stripes, because you know as backbench MLAs and you know as cabinet ministers that the same situation that exists in our ridings exists in your ridings. It's no different in Glace Bay than it is in Kings, or it is in Queens, or it is in Lunenburg, or it is in Yarmouth, or it is in Inverness. It's no different because it's the same department that handles the same housing right across this province, Mr. Speaker. These seniors, these people who are looking for that help, who are crying out to this government to do something now, and because of the situation we found ourselves in with the energy crisis, they are crying even more. Their cry can be heard even more now, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned at first, the income levels alone, deal with them. Somebody who makes or I should say in some cases, in some of the programs, somebody who makes $21,000 a year doesn't qualify, is not eligible to get their home fixed up, and the wind's blowing through the door, and the chimney's falling down, and the furnace is ready to blow up, and the windows are leaking, and they're supposed to repair that on $21,000 a year on fixed incomes. And this government says, well, let's do an audit of the finances. That might help everybody. You know, let's take a look at that. It's not enough. As a matter of fact, my first reaction when I came into the House today, this is the bill that we're dealing with. What a joke. What a joke. Have you run out of ideas entirely? That you wouldn't put something forward with more teeth into it than this when you know the situation in this province and what exists today, Mr. Speaker. Of course you have to take care and look after the finances. One would suggest that minister should have been looking after the finances all along in his job as the minister responsible for housing this province, Mr. Speaker. That's his job. He's been there long enough to know what's going on. And if he didn't, then there might be something wrong in the first place, Mr. Speaker. But this is it, an audit. I'm to go back home, and I could, if the minister wanted to come to Glace Bay, I'll, as the member for Dartmouth North indicated, I'll be glad to take him on a tour and show him how many units are boarded up. And I'll let him meet the families. I'll call some into my office who are on the waiting list, who they say, you make too much money, or you have to wait a year. And he can meet with those families and say, look, let's go up to such and such a street and look at that boarded-in home. And maybe the minister will take the boards off the windows and go in and fix up what should be fixed up. And the excuse, it is not the staff at the Department of Housing. It is not the staff there. They do the best that they possibly can under circumstances that are beyond their control. They don't have the budget, they don't have the manpower to do the job that should be done on the existing housing stock in this province. So you know that you have, I don't think the term is too harsh, you have a crisis in this province right now in terms of affordable public housing. We know that. We know that as opposition on this side. And the government, this is the ironic part of it, the government knows it too. Every cabinet minister on that side of the House, every backbencher on that side of the House knows what's happening in this province with housing. And they know people who are affected by this, they know how serious it is, and they know, I dare say they know people who are coming to them and saying, I can't afford to heat my home this winter. I can't afford to put oil in the tank. And because of that, I think I'm going to have to move into a senior citizens complex. But they're not going to, more than likely, because there's nothing there. There's no units available. They'd be extremely lucky if there was any available for them in Glace Bay or in Dartmouth or anywhere else across this province. So, Mr. Speaker, while the roofs are leaking and the windows are drafty, and the wind continues to blow through the walls and the doors and people are looking for insulation, and, we tell people that you have to be more energy efficient. Well, Mr. Speaker, you go out there and try and be energy efficient on $21,000 a year. And see how far you get to try and be energy efficient on that much money a year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would make sense that this government, and it would have pleased me, and it would have pleased, I'm sure, other opposition members on this side of the House, if the government had come forward with a progressive bill that said, here's what we're going to do to fix up the existing stock, here's what we're going to do to build new units, and here's what we're going to do with all that cash that Ottawa gave us in the first place to go towards affordable housing that we're not using for that purpose. That's the problem, Mr. Speaker. This government, time after time after time, has said we need more money from Ottawa. You have the money from Ottawa for this. You have it. So, Mr. Speaker, in keeping this in mind, I'm going to take my seat right now and conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Dartmouth East, and I was wondering if, before you commence, could you allow for an introduction?
Certainly.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for relinquishing some time. I'd like to bring the member's attention to the East Gallery. The East Gallery, a former member of this House of Assembly, as well as the current mayor of Port Hawkesbury, a long-time politician and a friend of many.
Old-time politician.
Old-time politician, my colleague says to me. But I'd like to welcome His Worship, Mayor Billy Joe McLean, and ask that we all give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Minister, and I'll now recognize the honourable member, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about Bill 230. And what I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, is, number one, I'm sure that when people opened that bill and saw the one sentence describing what that bill would actually accomplish, many people were probably, standing there with their jaws dropping to the floor. And I don't really know what they're going to be auditing because they haven't really spent any money to audit. So we'll have to wait and see. Maybe we can be hopeful and there will be something coming down the tubes that they will be auditing. Mr. Speaker, I would like today to speak about something that I was involved in recently, which was a march through some of the streets of Halifax with a group called HCAP, and they represent the Halifax Coalition Against Poverty. And Mr. Speaker, they were out in great numbers that day, and I was among them, as was one of my sons and his girlfriend. They put on a free breakfast that morning. They marched through the streets, and they were out to remind people that housing is a right. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a news clipping from the paper, a picture that was taken that day, just so that perhaps our minister might want to put that on his refrigerator with a magnet to remind him that housing certainly is a right in Nova Scotia, in Canada, and of course in the whole world. Mr. Speaker, we marched to remind people that housing is a right. We marched through the streets. Unfortunately, the march did have one turn for the worst in that one of the organizers was arrested. She was arrested, coincidentally, right in front of the Community Services building on Springgarden Road, just before actually we were going to finish up the march. Mr. Speaker, that was unfortunate, and certainly it's not going to stop that group from pursuing what they're trying to do for the homeless people and other people that are near to being homeless in HRM, in Nova Scotia. And these people are made up of a large amount of people of all age groups. And they're out to remind this government that what we need here in Nova Scotia, in fact, is nonprofit, public, affordable housing. We want this housing in our own communities. We want it for our seniors. We want it for our young people. We want it for anybody that certainly should have access to that. Mr. Speaker, I don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, today to speak on this, so I know we're running short on time. I would like to talk about some of the concerns that constituents in my area have brought forward to me in regards to this issue. And what's happened in Dartmouth East is that some people that, in fact, do have housing, but unfortunately, they will come to me and they will let me know about issues that are of concern to them. Unfortunately, they can't really complain to the superintendents or the landlords of these buildings for fear of being evicted, which is very unfortunate. I've had people come with concerns of mold in their apartment buildings, a heating issue, noise issues. Very recently, I had someone come in that has actually witnessed beatings in the building. They've put a security there it lasted a couple of days. That was gone. Drug dealers in the outer area of the apartment building, and they've actually gone to Community Services to see if they could actually get, I believe it was $50 a month more, so that they could move out of that apartment building into one that they deemed would be safer, still in Dartmouth, but they just feel that that building is unsafe for them right now, and the dad is in a wheelchair. I get people talking to me about the lack of smoke detectors in their apartment buildings, the lack of lighting, and I'm sure all the MLAs here have seen that for themselves, because when you're out canvassing, and sometimes we're out in the evenings, some of these hallways are very dark. You have to wonder, how people make it up and down the stairways, which brings up another issue of the lack of elevators. I've had people come to me and complain about no elevators in their apartment buildings. And we do have a fair amount of seniors in Dartmouth East, and it doesn't matter how many there are, if there's 2 or 3 or 2 or 300, 2 or 3,000. They all have a lot of the same issues that they bring forward. Mr. Speaker, I also, so I'm going to try, Dave, this afternoon to talk about things I've actually had experience myself with recently. And another one is that I just lucked into finding, well, I had read about it in the newspaper, but I had been at a function on a Friday evening with some Nova Scotia Engineers Association, and one of them is involved with Habitat for Humanity. And he and his wife were going to be going to the, I guess, handing over the key celebration, you would call it, the next day, and they kindly invited me along to participate in that. So I did go to that, even though it wasn't in my riding. It was in one of my the ridings attached to mine. And I have to say it was quite an emotional experience for me. I'd never been to one of those before. And I was quite amazed when waiting for the whole ceremony to begin. I talked to various people that were involved in the organizing, people that were involved in actually assessing the people that had applied to become one of the people that would end up with one of these interest-free homes. And they do put a lot of work equity into these. And while speaking to these people, I could not believe, I really didn't at the beginning, believe that in 6 short weeks, through the help of various businesses and sponsors, volunteers built that house. And I had a chance to actually go through that house when it was over. And it's a lovely house. I mean, it's in a nice neighborhood, access to schools, what have you, and the family, lovely family that's taking that over. And I was standing there and I was thinking to myself, and I actually mentioned to one of the ladies next to me, I said, I feel a resolution coming on. Because I just thought, if, these volunteers can do this in 6 weeks, then why the heck are we not doing this when we have something in the ballpark of $57 million just sitting there begging to be spent? And, I can hope that this Bill 230 will have some of that money to audit in the near future. But for me to stand there and just see that house, and there was one right next door to it actually that had, the keys had been passed over, I think the week before, to another family. And so now, the two moms are in these homes. They have children. The children will be going to the school and being part of that whole community there. And I think it's so important for society, and we're supposedly the lawmakers, the leaders of this province, and it's so important for us to not forget that though we are very fortunate in that we have been given this position. We're very fortunate, I think most of us are, that we have a warm home to go to at the end of the day when we leave here, that we have food, that we have shelter, all these things that are so important, that it's so important for us to really make sure that those less fortunate than us, that perhaps are down on their luck through no fault of their own, can still access safe, affordable housing in their own communities, so that they can be near their sons, daughters, grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles and aunts. And these are the people that make a community, and these are the people that help you in a time of need, which takes the burden off of the government in the end when we're all helping each other and being a community together, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to just mention also that while this summer going out in my constituency, I did have chance to speak to some seniors that are having a hard time staying in their homes because of they don't have the proper insulation in their homes. They can't access the grants. They'd like to maybe shut off part of their homes to save on energy, and they're really looking for some help from this government so that they can stay in their homes, stay in the communities that they work so hard, that they lived in those communities for their adult life. They're the people that volunteered in our school system, put their children through the school system, and that put the money back into this province through whatever means they could. And when I have seniors telling me that they are on a 2-year wait list to get into an apartment so that they can afford to live, I think just in a fair way that we want our seniors to live, it's a bit upsetting to me to stand there on the doorsteps and listen to those stories. So I did want them to know that I would bring that issue forward here at some point. And you never know, you're on the doorsteps and you hear different issues and you just wonder, well, how am I ever even going to get a chance to even talk about that? because it's not a free-for-all here, and we're working on a schedule and what have you, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, in the end, I will just say again, housing is a right, and I do hope that the minister takes that little piece of clipping out of the newspaper and really does stick it on his fridge, and just something to remind him every day that, we're here to work for the people of Nova Scotia, and hopefully, he can do that in the future. And, Mr. Speaker, I will sit down with that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Fourth, recognize the Government House Leader to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been following the debate this afternoon with great interest. This, as everybody has said, is a very simple bill, but nobody's spoken about the principle of the bill, I don't think, on the other side. Well, I'm sorry. At least somebody understood what the bill was about. This bill is a consequence of a observation by the Auditor General, and we're simply accommodating what is a good accounting practice. Nobody said, thank you very much, government, for doing a good job, but however, I am pleased to commend the government for coming. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move second reading of bill number, and I've forgotten what the bill is, it's so long ago, Bill 230.
The motion is for second reading on bill number 230. Is House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay.
Bill number 230, an act to amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act.
Motion is carried. In order the bill be referred to the Committee of Law Amendments. And I'll recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 232, the Optometry Act?
Bill number 232, the Optometry Act. And I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to stand in my place to offer a few comments on behalf of my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, optometrists, as we all know, provide high-quality eye health care here in our province, and there's more than 80 doctors of optometry widely distributed in communities throughout our province, examining, diagnosing, measuring, and treating eye conditions through methods other than surgery. Optometrists are now supporting amendments to the Optometry Act that will reflect the evolution of the profession since the legislation was first developed in the 1960s. Mr. Speaker, amendments to the Optometry Act will update the scope of practice definition and composition to the board, establish a college, and provide delegation authority. Amendments to the Optometry Act will increase accountability to the public by moving the regulatory process from the Nova Scotia Association of Optometrists to a professional college. It will also improve self-regulation and streamline the governance process, making it easier for the governing body to hold its members to standards set out by the Nova Scotia College of Optometrists. Mr. Speaker, the amended Optometry Act, the bill put before us, will better serve the people of our province through a public accountability, and also, in addition to with more flexibility and provision of outstanding eye health care to Nova Scotians. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the comments from my colleagues on the other side of the House.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have a few comments about this bill number 232, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important that government recognizes the different areas of health care in our communities and in our province, Mr. Speaker. And definitely, I think this act, one pertaining to optometry, Mr. Speaker, is a division of health care in our province, because we're all aware of complications when it comes to our vision, Mr. Speaker. Many of us take it for granted, but it's important to have those standards and accountability in place when we go and seek the services of those interest groups that this bill will affect, Mr. Speaker. It's good to see that we recognize the importance of identifying the different areas of healthcare in this province, about especially optometry, Mr. Speaker, and respecting what that the evolution of that service that they provide Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, because it does affect the amount of money that's spent in healthcare. If we can ensure that everyone has a healthy vision and proper care and the guidance that the professionals in this field give the consumer, or for that matter, the patients they see on a regular basis throughout our province, Mr. Speaker, there's definite benefits for Nova Scotians. This bill pertains to the Nova Scotia College of Optometrists, Mr. Speaker. It's important that government recognizes the organizations and the push to have especially health care related organizations in this province accountable to the people they serve. And by this bill coming forward and going on to law amendments and hopefully coming back and passing, that we will do that, Mr. Speaker. We will take the steps to ensure that the people that use the services of an optometrist, Mr. Speaker, are protected and that they are accountable, for one, which is what they need. They've called for improved accountability, improved standards and practices that they use, and by enabling them to govern over themselves, per se, Mr. Speaker, by creating a college that has the standards in place and that accountability for the public to go to, and for them to not only, account for the services and the procedures they do, Mr. Speaker, but to look at future developments in that field of optometry, Mr. Speaker. There's always new pieces, new devices, instruments, new ways of preventing illnesses, Mr. Speaker, and I think by allowing them to have the opportunity to look at that in the future, I think under this piece of legislation, I'd have to commend the government for having it in there, is the ability to change those standards and policies through council, approval through council, Mr. Speaker, instead of legislating those standards and regulations in the piece of legislation in the creation of their college, Mr. Speaker, because what that does, it limits the ability for this organization, this facet of healthcare, to change and evolve when new procedures come into effect, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of research in all aspects of healthcare, including this one, Mr. Speaker, and it's important that we enable these colleges, as this one, when it's formed, to change and evolve the practices and the procedures and the standards that they use, without having to come back to the legislature for changes and amendments to a piece of legislation. It was important in my profession, Mr. Speaker, as a paramedic. Everybody knows recently that there was a piece of legislation passed to create a college for that, College of Paramedics, Mr. Speaker. And it was important for us at the time when we were crafting that, and I was involved in that in the early days, many years ago. It took many years for this government to finally recognize the need to put in place and recognize the importance of the profession of paramedicine, Mr. Speaker, in this province. And many people pushed for that. But it was important for us as a profession to evolve, to ensure that those standards of practice, those policies that are in the creation of a college aren't legislated in, so that we can change and we can adapt. And it's important that different organizations can do that under blanket legislation about creating a college, Mr. Speaker. It's in the Paramedic Act, which is good to have there, and it's in this act. So I know that the individuals, the Nova Scotians that work in this field appreciate the ability down the road to change the way they deliver their service to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and without having to come back to the legislature and have amendments made to a piece of legislation, because for total honesty, Mr. Speaker, we're not here that often, and it is a long procedure to get amendments to a piece of legislation that may have not been on the radar when it was first enacted, Mr. Speaker, and it's important that we recognize that, and it's important, and I'm glad to see it in this piece of legislation. So I know that many people over the years have worked in this field to get to this point, and I think they'll appreciate this piece of legislation going on through the process here in the legislature. And I hope that with any concerns they have, that they enable themselves to make input when they can to see if there's any changes. It's my understanding as of today that they do agree with this piece of legislation. That's why our caucus will support this process to send this piece of legislation on to law amendments, and we look forward to it and to coming back and look forward to the future development of optometry in this province to do the prevention side of healthcare, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I encourage other members to give a brief moment and some comments on this, and I look forward to this progressing, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pleased to rise and speak just briefly in support of Bill number 232, the Optometry Act. Mr. Speaker, it's a bill that's it has been a while in the making. Yes, everyone agrees with that. It required diligence and a lot of hard work on behalf of optometrists and dispensing opticians to come to the point where we are today. And I commend both professional organizations for their dedication and their hard work. And now optometrists are joining other health professional bodies in establishing their own college and self-regulating their profession. Mr. Speaker, included in this change will be both a complaints process and disciplinary procedures if and when they're required, and that will ensure accountability for the profession, one that needs to be, as we all should be, open and transparent. And Mr. Speaker, the scope of practice is also an important aspect of this piece of legislation. It's an area which public accountability is required. So, Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation is a positive one, and one which we support to move to second reading, and hopefully, should there be anyone from the general public who will appear and speak, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, we'll be keeping an eye on this one. Thank you very much.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Health Promotion to close debate on Bill number 232.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the members for their comments. I'll be sure to pass them on to the Minister of Health. And given that, as the member said, we're all saying eye to eye now, I move that second reading of Bill number 32, an act respecting the practice of optometry, be so moved.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 232. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 232, an act respecting the practice of optometry.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 235, the Dispensing Opticians Act.
Bill number 235, Dispensing Opticians Act. The Honourable Minister responsible for Health Promotion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and this was actually mentioned during the previous debate, and obviously there's similarities between both, but Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to say a few comments on behalf of my colleague, Minister of Health, on an act respecting dispensing opticians. And Mr. Speaker, again, our opticians in our province are committed to providing Nova Scotians with high-quality optical dispensing and health care, and they're professionals, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the changes being put forward are as a result of a great deal of work on their part upon the Board of Dispensing Opticians, who have worked very hard with the Department of Health and many others to develop the amendments being put forward to what really is outdated legislation that will, at the end of the day, enhance the accountability to the public. It'll improve the disciplinary process and allow more flexibility in the practice of their profession, which I think will better serve all of Nova Scotians. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the comments from my colleagues.
Recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In general, of course, we're supportive of this bill and of others that have come forward that have set up comprehensive regimes for self-regulating professions. I speak to this bill really for two reasons. One is because, in general, I think we have to remind ourselves, and more importantly, remind those who are being given the power to self-regulate, that this is not something that they are automatically entitled to. We have to remind them that they are given these powers ultimately in the public interest. Indeed, there's language in this bill that talks about that. In order that the public interest may be served and protected, it says in one of the sections. And that's the key phrase. The reason I think we have to remind these groups that that is the case is because of the proliferation of these organizations that we now see in our province and elsewhere in the country. It's especially true amongst healthcare professions. We have traditionally, of course, had doctors as a self-regulating profession. Some extent nurses now are. We're dealing here with opticians and also dispensing opticians. There are psychologists who have their own board and college and are able to be gatekeepers for admission to the profession and disciplinarians for the profession. I'm sure there are others out there, and I know as well that there is constant pressure from other groups inside the whole healthcare system to hive off their activities as separate groups that have these powers. This, of course, is just within the healthcare system, because in other professions, architects and engineers and lawyers, of course, have the same kinds of powers. Now, the difficulty is that these groups are being given powers that in some instances are highly technical legal powers. Just think, for example, about the problem of being able to determine what are the appropriate qualifications for admission to practice. Think about what are the complexities involved in determining whether someone should be suspended from the practice of their profession. Of course, the consequences are enormous for the individual. We want fairness to be of the essence of what goes on at every turn. So I think we have to publicly remind ourselves and these bodies as we set them up and as we revise the parameters under which they operate, that it is only because it is appropriate and we hope convenient that they will look out for the public interest and serve and protect as they carry out their duties, that we enact such bills. But now, in addition to reminding ourselves formally that this is a serious undertaking by such organizations, I want to take this opportunity to just put on record a small experience we had in my constituency association with the pre-existing dispensing opticians organization. We were approached by a candidate for admission to the profession. And this candidate was having some difficulty in dealing with the board over the criteria that the board had established. And I have to say that when I heard something of the circumstances and attempted to relay the concerns to the board, I encountered some difficulties. First difficulty I encountered was that the contact information for the board on the Department of Health website was not accurate. Second difficulty I encountered was that in trying to actually get hold of the people who were supposed to be in charge of the organization, when I finally did find out where they were, mostly what I got was answering machines, and nor did I get a quick response. When the board turned its mind to the particular circumstance, I have to say it was not what I thought flexible in thinking about the problem that had been presented to it. I'm happy to report that in the end, and just last week, I think, the board resolved the problem, I think to the satisfaction of the candidate and presumably to their own satisfaction. I've no idea whether this occurred because they had Bill 235 coming up in front of the House. I hope that isn't the case. But what I'm saying is that in the one encounter that I actually did have with this particular organization, I didn't find that it was entirely satisfactory. I didn't find that affairs were conducted with the ease, openness, transparency, sense of fundamental fairness, sense, I should say, of an appropriate understanding of the duties that had been entrusted to their care. So, although, of course, we're going to support this bill because it does, as the Honourable the Minister said, it expands and strengthens some of the regulatory regime appropriately. I want to say that I hope that this organization and that other similarly placed organizations will think long and hard about the powers with which they've been entrusted. I want them to consider the fact that when this legislature decides to recognize them as the gatekeeping authority for their profession, it does so with a serious intent. And our serious intent is that they should pay close attention to the powers that they have to exercise. It may even be that it's time for the Department of Health, which for the most part is the department that has some kind of nominal supervision over these bodies, should think about whether they might want to offer training for the people who are on the boards. Part of what's done is that the Governor and Council can appoint people to the boards, and the idea is that they will represent the public interest, but they don't always come with the kind of training that's necessary to think carefully about the rights and reputation and process that should apply when dealing with the issues that come in front of them. Anyway, it's a suggestion for the minister, but with those comments, I do say that indeed we will be supporting this bill, and we look forward to its appropriate implementation by the bodies that are created through this legislation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my previous comments on the previous bill, I was already addressing both of these bills in advance of good legislation put forward by the government. And did my eyes roll there, Mr. Speaker? I'm not sure. But anyway, look, the previous speaker made a good point, Mr. Speaker. We have to be very careful in this self-regulating powers that we give to groups, okay? Be very careful because we've had legislation come before this House. It comes to mind about the cosmetology legislation that came before this House, if I'm not mistaken, that, you know, there were some problems with that afterwards, let's say. But after it was first introduced. But while it was introduced, those problems were brought forward. I think eventually they were ironed out, but that's part of the parliamentary process of debate that we take place in this House, and that's why we're here, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, if and again, I think someone made the point too that there are many groups out there within the healthcare sector itself. I think of dental hygienists are one group I know that I've spoken with recently that are looking for again the same sort of powers that we're not. I was going to use the phrase handing out. That's not the proper phrase. That we're taking a look at here and being very careful and scrutinizing that indeed those self-regulatory powers are there. But in this case, the Dispensing Opticians Act is going to improve the process of complaints and discipline for opticians and create a college of dispensing opticians responsible for governing the industry. So, Mr. Speaker, unlike the current regulatory board, as I understand it, members are appointed by government. The majority of this college's board are going to be elected. So, Mr. Speaker, that's a positive thing. So, having said that, Mr. Speaker, again, this piece of legislation we see as a positive one, and we look forward to moving it ahead, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Recognize the Minister of Tourism and Culture. Responsible for health promotion be to close debate on Bill number 235. Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments. I'll be sure to pass them on to the Minister of Health as well. And certainly, Mr. Speaker, indeed, I think this is a good piece of legislation. But I do agree with the members opposite that in giving and providing the opportunity to self-regulate in many cases, we have to be mindful of what that means at the end of the day. And certainly we do see many bills such as this coming forward. With that being said, I know there'll be time for further comment, Mr. Speaker, as the bill progresses. And so I move that this bill now be read a second time.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 235. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 235, an act respecting dispensing opticians.
Or this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Justice, I'd call Bill 236 for second reading, the Small Claims Court Act. And if I remember correctly, this simply increases the cap on cases that come before the Small Claims Court.
Bill number 236. The Honourable Member for Cole-Harbour-Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to stand as a justice critic for my caucus and talk a few moments with regard to this bill. Small Claims Court, Mr. Speaker, was originally set up as a court that was meant for smaller claims so that people wouldn't have to worry about all the legal aspects of it. Maybe you didn't have to hire a lawyer. It was a simpler process. They could file a fee in order to apply for smaller debts that erode or smaller contractual disputes. They could go to small claims court to have them dealt with. It is a very good idea, an idea that I think has had a large impact in Nova Scotia as it has across Canada for ensuring that what would be considered nominal amounts or smaller amounts could be dealt with in a more efficient manner and one in which the rules are slightly more relaxed. Where people are getting a fair hearing, but at the same time can ensure, Mr. Speaker, that they're not going to have to go out and hire a lawyer for what originally was probably a $500 or $1,000 claim. And in many cases, that was effective. The problem is now, and I want to start by saying my caucus doesn't have a problem necessarily with increasing this. But, Mr. Speaker, the concern is that by raising it even to $15,000 where it is now, or now with this bill to $25,000, the lawyers get involved. People are going to be hiring lawyers with regard to these matters. They are now. And you're going to have situations where what was meant originally to be a court that could be used by the average citizen as one in which they didn't have to follow all the trappings of the Supreme Court with regard to a matter that's a tort or a contract dispute. Now, at $25,000 maximum, you're going to have these things still. What was meant the intent of the court to make things simpler, I would suggest, is gone. The rules may be slightly relaxed, but you're still going to be hiring a lawyer. Maybe the process will be a little quicker, but that lawyer is still going to be charging fees on an hourly rate or a contingency. And, Mr. Speaker, as a result, we're going to have, and we do have, and with this, we're only going to continue to have a small claims court that, frankly, has lost much of the vision that it was originally set for. You know, it wouldn't be such a bad idea, maybe, if we actually created, a small claims court. One in which, for $1,000 or $2,000, we could go back to the system we had. That's right. Where people then could have the ability to actually go out and do this. Now, originally, small claims court, I think, was envisioned that if you had a dispute with someone and you were two private citizens. But at $25,000, I would suggest to you, and I don't have any anecdotal or statistical information on this, you're going to see it used predominantly by corporations, and there's going to be disputes between those corporations. And in many ways, those are ones that, you know, I understand at $25,000, it's probably still not enough to go out and go to Supreme Court and hire a lawyer and pay the fees that you're going to pay, because it's going to probably cost as much to do that as it would be to actually, to bring back the money that you were suing for. But I would suggest that the intent of the court, as it originally was, for average citizens to be able to have access to the legal system, to have access to civil justice, to have access to a problem when there's a tort or negligence or a contract dispute, is gone. That this court now has become, it may be slightly less complicated than the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia, yet because of the fees, we're going to have lawyers involved. Lawyers are going to be more involved now that we're increasing it to $25,000, and as a result, we're going to have a situation where yes, more lawyers involved. That's right. I guess my barrister society may have something to say to me after this speech, but as it stands, I always envisioned small claims court when it was originally created. How long that was ago? 30 years ago, I'm presuming. You would have a situation, Mr. Speaker, where this was meant to be a court that could be used by the people without having to be hiring lawyers at $200, $300, $400, God knows how many dollars an hour. But, Mr. Speaker, it can be now with this, it's only creating a court that I think is going to result in more lawyers being involved. It's going to create a longer process. It's going to create a more cumbersome process. And we've lost the vision that was originally for the small claims court. And that's unfortunate. And I would hope that it's still something that could be looked at, something that this government may want to consider, whether there's a way in which the rules could still be adjusted in some way to make it easier for even smaller claims under $5,000, some way that we could have rules that would allow, again, for people to be able to access that without necessarily having to pay the lawyers' fees that can be so exorbitant in some cases, Mr. Speaker. So, having said that, obviously, moving this from $15,000 to $25,000 is something that the government feels is necessary in order to continue the process. I would expect the Minister of Justice at third reading to be able to put something on the record as to the specific rationale as to why we were raising this from $15,000 to $25,000. I know since I've been here, I think it's gone from 5 to 10 to 15 and now to 25. So in 7.5 years, we've seen a 5-fold increase in the amount that we are now allowing for people to sue for in a small claims court. That's a lot, and a good rationale might be useful. If it's a matter of saying that small businesses find this more convenient than having to spend the full amount on lawyers' fees in the Supreme Court, that's an acceptable answer. I only ask that at some point while this bill is still in the House, that the Minister of Justice put something on the record as to why we've had this 5-fold increase in the limit with regard to suing in small claims court, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important. This has been happening on a regular basis. It's like every year or every other year we've had an increase, and I think there needs to be some rationale provided, even if the rationale is that every other province is at $25,000. I can accept that, but I think for purposes of the record, it's important that Nova Scotians have some record as to why there's a rationale for this, and I would hope the Minister of Justice at third reading would be prepared to do that, Mr. Speaker. So we'll see this bill go to law amendments. I'm sure there'll be a long line of people ready to speak on it, but after we hear from them, we will decide whether there's any amendments, and we'll see the bill back here afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise as the acting justice critic this week on behalf of our party to have a few remarks regarding Bill 236. And I want to say to my learned friend to my right here, not philosophically, but literally to my right, the NDP House Leader, who is making a plea for less work for lawyers, and that's a good thing. That's right. And I think what this bill does, Mr. Speaker, is make it easier for citizens to have their matters dealt with in a timely and appropriate fashion, rather than going to the expense of court proceedings with the same lawyers that my friend, the NDP, was talking about here. I think it's at first blush, it appears to me to be a good bill, in that more people will be able to access the small claims court for the amount of money we're talking about here, which is not a lot of money by today's standards, but I mean it gives a wider range for more people to be able to access that particular service. If you will, it takes more people under the umbrella of the small claims court operation, and I think that's a good thing, because normally what's happened in the small claims court is they're able to adjudicate matters and to settle matters quite quickly. And I believe for that reason, we'd certainly like to move this bill on to law amendments, and as the NDP House Leader has said, wait for the hordes of people that will come in on that particular bill, and then we'll make a determination as to whether or not the bill will go any further. But I suggest that perhaps it might, Mr. Speaker. So for now, I'm sure that our justice critic next week may have something else to say on it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Recognize the member for Fairview.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's one point that I remember bearing my soul in the House and confessing that I used to be a Liberal. Well, that's I've said that before, and that's in my past. It's well in my past. And now, Mr. Speaker, I have to stand up and say I'm a lawyer, okay? And my experience as a lawyer has given me some experience with small claims. In fact, I think I might well be the only practicing lawyer in the House, because I know there's other lawyers, but they don't have their practicing status anymore. Well, Mr. Speaker, yeah, but he's a real lawyer. In any event, Mr. Speaker, even during the time that I've been an MLA, I've kept up my practicing status, which costs me several $1,000s every year, because every so often somebody will come through my constituency office door, where essentially what they need is legal help. They don't need a politician's help, they need legal help. And the fact that I can put on my lawyer hat once in a while means that occasionally I'm able to help them in ways that perhaps I couldn't otherwise. And this has taken me, even quite recently, into small claims court. And that's why I want to stand here today, because like so many things that this government does, what appears to be one thing on the surface is quite another thing when you understand how the system actually works. And as is typical with this government, the news release that accompanied this bill was, this is great news, it's good for the people, it's going to advance the cause of informal justice. But anybody who has been to small claims court, Mr. Speaker, knows that it's not necessarily so. So what this bill does is it increases the limit of the small claims court from $15,000 to $25,000. And as my colleague from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage has pointed out, that's a big increase just in the last few years. It was a few years ago it went from 10 to 15. It was only a year or two before that. It went from 5 to 10. When I was a young lawyer, which is getting to be longer and longer ago, the limit was $5,000. So when I started out in practice, $5,000 was the small claims court limit. And you know what? There were hardly any lawyers in the room, because $5,000 claims typically did not make it worth a client's while to actually have a lawyer in the room, because if it was any kind of a serious case, they were going to spend $1,000 or $2,000 simply paying the lawyer before they knew whether they were going to win or lose. But Mr. Speaker, let me tell you one thing that I know, because I've been in small claims court, and I've been in there recently, is that now, today, the room is full of lawyers. Because even with a limit of $15,000, it is now worth the client's while, if they can afford it, to have a lawyer in the room. So I was there. It would only be about a month ago, the last time I was in small claims court on behalf of a constituent, and I walked into the room, and the room was full of lawyers. Lawyers that I haven't seen for a while. It was a great sort of old home week. I get to say hi to people I haven't seen for a number of years, because I haven't seen them since I was last actively engaged in practice. And there they are in the so-called informal, quick justice system of small claims court. That's the reality of small claims court, Mr. Speaker. It is very legalized, very legalized. And now what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to up the limit again to $25,000. Now think about this, Mr. Speaker. The biggest single investment that people make in their lives usually is their home. And the second biggest investment they make in their lives is their car. Now we're getting a small claims court level that is going to be high enough to cover the second biggest investment that most people make in their lives. Never mind every other transaction that they make, every other business dealing they have, every other commercial dealing, every retail dealing that they have in their lives is now going to be under the small claims court limit. In fact, for most people, there are going to be very, very few things they ever do in their lives that are going to qualify for the Supreme Court and not for the Small Claims Court. That's a pretty sobering thing, Mr. Speaker. Most things most people are going to do for the rest of their lives, they can be taken to Small Claims Court. Because here's the other dirty little secret of Small Claims Court, just, besides the fact that it's full of lawyers, and that is, who do you think the plaintiffs are? They're big companies who can afford a lawyer, who on a docket of 8 or 10 items will have 5 or 6 of them, so they can afford to send a lawyer, and they're picking off the little guy in Small Claims Court. That's what's happening. That's what it's for. That's who's there. It's not you. It's not me, Mr. Speaker, who's in Small Claims Court. It's the big companies who are using it to collect their debts. And so what we're doing is we're making the collection system for Nova Scotia companies quicker and easier. Good for us. Give ourselves a pat in the back. I don't remember reading that in the Minister of Justice news release. And if any of you doubt what I say, go down to Small Claims Court tonight, the old provincial courthouse in Spring Garden Road. Go down tonight, look at the list that's posted on the wall, starts at 6 o'clock. Go down there and see who's there. Not who the defendants are. It's not the little guy taking the big guy to court. I'm not talking about who the defendants are. Who are the plaintiffs? Who are the people that are using this system? Mr. Speaker, this bill makes it easier for big commercial interests to put it to the little guy. That's what it does. I don't remember reading that in the minister's news release. So, you know, it's... The truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that if somebody is a defendant who doesn't have a leg to stand on, who don't have a case to make, there's already a process in the Supreme Court. Strangely enough, and lawyers know this, Supreme Court is actually faster than Small Claims Court if the defendant doesn't file a defense. Because there's a procedure in the Supreme Court called default judgment, where if a defense isn't filed after 10 days, you get an automatic judgment. You don't even have to go to court. It's only if the defendant files a defense that you have to go through the whole rigmarole. Now, what is it exactly that costs so much money in your regular legal proceeding? Well, sure, it's the lawyer, but if you go down to the Supreme Court, before you get to court, you have this whole process called production of documents and discovery. Discovery of documents, discovery of people. That's what takes the time, that's what costs all the money. And if you haven't been involved in the system, most people I find don't realize this, Mr. Speaker, is that the lawyers get to question all the witnesses before they ever get to court. And they do it on the record because the idea is that once it gets to court, there should be no surprises. Every lawyer should know what every witness is going to say. Right? That's what costs all the money, is if you've ever been involved in a lawsuit, you know you have to go to a lawyer's office and they have the transcription service, and you sit down and you're questioned in a private office by a lawyer. That's called discovery. And the discoveries can go on for days, and because they can go on for weeks. And that costs a heck of a lot of money, and lawyers' fees, transcription fees, all that kind of stuff. And that's before you've set foot in a courtroom. But that allows the two parties to see the relative weight of the evidence so they know whether to settle or not. And okay, so you don't have to do that in Small Claims Court. But what does that really mean in practice? What it really means is that Small Claims Court is trial by ambush. That means you walk up those courthouse steps in the courthouse in Spring Garden Road and here in Halifax, if in fact that's your local jurisdictional courthouse. It's the only one I've ever been to. You walk up the courthouse steps and you have no idea what the other side is bringing with them. You go up there having no idea what witnesses they have, what documents they have. You don't know who's going to be there and what they're going to say. It's trial by ambush. It's very, very rough justice. Believe me, Mr. Speaker. It is very rough justice. And this bill puts the limit to $25,000, which is more than most people will spend on anything other than their house and their car in their entire lives. Is that a good thing? Back when I was a young lawyer and the limit was $5,000, it was different. I'm still young. I should say a younger lawyer. When I was a younger lawyer, $5,000 kept it informal, mostly, not entirely, mostly kept the lawyers out. It was still very rough justice, but it was informal and it was quick. Listen, $25,000, it's mostly big commercial companies. They're mostly having lawyers, and they can crush any plaintiff because they have all the power and the knowledge on their side. Because who do you think is on the defendant's side? Well, I'll tell you about the last case I was in small claims court on, Mr. Speaker. It was a fairly complicated case involving the purchase of a vehicle. And well, that's a good question, actually. The member for Cape Breton South, did I charge for it? I never charge for any legal work that I do for a constituent, ever. Never have, never will. So this was all entirely pro bono, okay? I'm doing it because that was the best way that I could help that particular constituent. So they got themselves into a spot of trouble over the purchase of a vehicle. They got themselves into a spot of trouble over the purchase of a vehicle. They got into a lease that they really couldn't handle. That was the problem. Now these people, this couple, they weren't what you would call really highly educated. They certainly didn't understand the documents that they'd signed. And they didn't really understand the numbers that were in the documents, because when I actually put it to them and said, did you realize that you signed for this? Did you realize that you signed for that? They said no. No, we had no idea. It's just we needed a vehicle. We were desperate. We asked for a payment of $500 a month, and we got a vehicle for $500 a month. They didn't stop to think about all the other questions that they might have asked, which, to cut a long story short, were just, did they get a good deal or not? Never mind what was their monthly payment. So they got into a spot of trouble, and there were some real difficulties with the car dealership. Now, the car dealership had a legitimate case. They had got these people to sign the deal. They had a contract, and these people did sign it. The question was it fair? Or was it unconscionable? Or was there something about it that meant that maybe they should reach some kind of an accommodation with each other rather than having the plaintiff sue them for the full amount? And these are people, Mr. Speaker, frankly, that I met at the local food bank. These are not people who had a lot of money anyway, all right? Okay, these are people who, by anybody's measure, are the working poor here in Nova Scotia. And here they were with a notice to go to small claims court, and they had arrayed against them this very experienced, very knowledgeable car dealership. I've got nothing against the car dealership. I bought my first car from the same dealership. They're simply in the car business. They know their business, they know it well, and they know how to put things to people in such a way that they come out on the winning end. That's business. Yeah, that's business. And they sure as heck came out in the winning end of this particular deal. So that's what the kind of thing that is happening in small claims court is. You have relatively, I'm getting to that. We have relatively uneducated people with relative lack of knowledge about law up against quite sophisticated business people who often bring lawyers with them. And you know what? That night in small claims court, this same car dealership had 4 cases. Okay? And that is absolutely typical of what goes on in small claims court. It is a dealership, it's a big company, and they've got a whole list on the same night. And they, as often as not, have a lawyer. But in this particular case, this car dealership did not send a lawyer. And as soon as they saw that I was there, they said, we're not going ahead tonight. Yeah. My friend from Cape Breton Center jokes, as soon as they saw me, they said, great, we're going to win now. But that's not what they said. What they did say, now we had our witnesses, we had our documents, we were ready to roll. And as soon as they saw that I was in the room to try and level the playing field a little bit, to try and help these people operate on the same playing field as this very experienced and savvy car dealership, they said, we're not going ahead tonight, we're adjourning it, we're going to another night so we can get our own lawyer. And the guy, the owner himself was there, of this big city car dealership that I won't name because I don't think that's fair. The owner said, because you're here, I want a level playing field. That was his words. I want a level playing field, so I'm going to go out and get my own lawyer. And I found it hard to believe that this very experienced, very savvy businessman who'd been in small claims court hundreds of times, no exaggeration, hundreds of times, was against this poor, relatively uneducated, poor couple who were scared to death because it was the first time they'd ever been before a court of any kind, that he considered that to be a level playing field. And it was only because they had somebody who could advocate on their behalf that he said, no, I'm not going to go ahead. And so it didn't go ahead that night. And in fact, the parties have reached a settlement outside of court, which I think is better for everybody, Mr. Speaker. But my point is not did that couple win or did they lose? Not did I win or did they lose? That is the typical case that is in small claims court. It's experience and money against the little guy. And anybody who thinks that it's two of the little guys against each other are kidding themselves. And like I said earlier, if you don't believe me, go down to the Spring Garden Road Courthouse tonight and go see who's on the docket, see how many lawyers are in that room. So there we go. So that's the bill we have before us. The minister announces it as a great good news story. And Mr. Speaker, my message tonight, I guess, is when you really understand how small claims court works, this is not a good news story. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Government House Leader to close debate.
Speaker, in moving second reading of the bill, I would like to respond, however, to both the speakers from the New Democratic Party with regard to the fact that we're doing something that's going to take away from the small claims court something that people had before but will not have in the future. We're not changing that at all. All we're doing is changing the cap. The person who has a claim, Mr. Speaker, of $100 against a plumber, or a plumber who has a $100 claim against a householder, those types of claims are not in any way affected by this bill. All that we're simply doing, Mr. Speaker, is accommodating the fact that the number or the amount of the typical case, Mr. Speaker, has increased. And it's increased quite rapidly, to be quite honest. And Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, the objective of this court is to provide low cost resolution. And so, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the remarks from the opposition, and I know that the Minister of Justice, when the Minister of Justice closes this bill on the third reading, that he will certainly allay the fears of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, the next bill is also a Minister of Justice bill.
Excuse me, we'll have to move. We'll have to deal with that.
Yeah, I should do that first, I guess. Mr. Speaker, okay. I move second reading of bill number 236.
The motion is for second reading of Bill 236. Is the House ready for the question? Would all those in favour signify by saying aye? Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 236, an act to amend Chapter 430 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Small Claims Court Act.
I order this bill to be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 241 the Commercial Mediation Act?
Bill number 241, the Commercial Mediation Act.
This, I understand, is a lawyer's delight, and will enable the lawyers on the opposition benches to speak to us about an act that's based on the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. The Model Law on International Commercial Conciliation 2002, and interpreting this act, consideration be given to its international origin and the need to promote uniformity in its application and the observance of good faith. And I'm sure we all look forward to the debate on this particular bill.
Recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my caucus as a justice critic, I have been asked to say a few words on this bill. Actually, it's funny because the House Leader for the government House Leader said this is a lawyer's delight. I don't know if he meant the debate or the bill itself, because I want to say that this bill actually would probably cut down on a lot of lawyers' fees. I want to make that point because it's about mediation instead of arbitration or going to court. And this would be a bill that recognizes international, I think it's a... I was reading this, this bill. It's always interesting to see. I swear the UN spends more time making up the names of their UNCTRAL, I think this one's called, or something like that. I swear they spend more time making up the names of their organizations than they actually do on the content sometimes. But anyway, I digress. This bill basically creates a model of where corporations, businesses that have contractual disputes that want to mediate have the right to voluntarily accept mediation. If they do, it will come under this protocol, one that's been recognized. I'm not sure how far or how wide it's recognized in the industrial world. The UN has adopted this. I presume we're doing this across Canada. I assume this is a harmonized process that all provinces are adopting. We're doing it on our behalf. I assume the federal government. There's a lot of assumptions here. Again, it'd be nice if at some point at third reading the Minister of Justice could put some of this on the record so that we have a better understanding of exactly why. But I'm assuming that we have we have the federal government having signed this convention, and now we have the provinces implementing this en masse, so that we do have consistent rules that not only for Canadians, but when Canadians are doing commercial transactions in the rest of the world, it's an opportunity for them to be able to know that there's a mediation process available to them, and that the people that they're working with, maybe in the Netherlands or China or Tuvalu, can actually have an opportunity to they will actually know the mediation process, and they'll have an opportunity to access it. It's a fairly straightforward bill, just recognizing the mediation is available. Mediation doesn't necessarily end if someone goes into arbitration if the two parties agree. And where a mediated settlement is made through mediation, that can actually be put into a judgment of the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia, and it's equivalent to a court order, Mr. Speaker. All this stuff is good. None of it's mandatory. It's voluntary. Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's anything in this bill that is too threatening to how we operate business in this province. It may make it a little easier in some circumstances when they're dealing with others in other countries through contracts, so that we have a consistent system. That's all good, Mr. Speaker, and I don't think we have any problems with passing this on to law amendments. And again, maybe there'll be a large lineup of people commenting. So,
thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Bill 241, the Commercial Mediation Act. That is the one you called. There's three justice bills here, and I think they're very similar to one another. But anyway, again, on behalf of, as a non-practicing non-lawyer over here, I just wanted to say that on behalf of our justice critic, we're prepared to agree to send this bill on to law amendments, and I'm sure that our justice critic will have some more comment to make on that, as well as when it comes back for debate in committee of the whole House. So, Mr. Speaker, we'll agree to move this bill on.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Government House Leader to close debate.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I move second reading of Bill number 241.
Thank you. Motion is for second reading of Bill 241. Are you ready? Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
An act respecting commercial mediation.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee of Law Amendments. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in fairness, I think that we will not discuss any more bills for second reading today, and Mr. Speaker, therefore move that the House do now rise to meet again tomorrow at the hour of 9 a.m., and the House will sit from 9 a.m. until 12 noon, and the order of business will be public bills for second reading and we'll go in the order that they are on the paper. If we finish all those bills on the order paper, Mr. Speaker, and we have some bills back for Committee of the Whole House, we'll do Committee of the Whole House. Beg your pardon?
Thank you. The motion is to adjourn the House till 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded? Motion's carried. We're adjourned till 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The subject of the late debate was the adjournment debate was submitted by the honourable member for Dartmouth North. Therefore, be it resolved that the Department of Transportation clearly inform the public of its future plans, including timelines for Highway 113.
I will recognize the member from Halifax Fairview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to make clear that I'm going to be sharing my time today with the member for Timberley Prospect. In fact, the majority of the time will be his. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to be on the record about on this, Mr. Speaker. Let me be very clear that I personally am opposed to this particular highway project, the 113. This is a beautiful, natural wilderness area, Mr. Speaker, that needs to be preserved for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And I know that that is a bit of a cliche, but Mr. Speaker, once this area is gone, once it's bisected by the proposed highway, it's gone forever. It's gone for good. And at the very least, there ought to be an environmental assessment on this project. And there would be an environmental assessment if it was 100 meters longer, Mr. Speaker, about the length of one end of this building to the other end, because there's an environmental assessment for a 10-kilometer road, and guess what this one clocks in at? 9.9 kilometers. And Mr. Speaker, I don't think that's an accident. But here's the other thing about this, and that is this secrecy that this government loves so much. This is Crown land. It's Crown land that's under the control of the province of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, in order to get this project going, they don't even need to get the approval of this House. They can do it in the back rooms. They can do it by order in council. They can transfer this Crown land. And the people who care about this wilderness area are keeping an eye every day on the orders in council that are published, just in case the government tries to sneak one through. And what I would like to hear the Minister of Natural Resources say in the debate today is that he promises this House and the people of the Halifax Regional Municipality that he personally guarantees that there will be no transfer of Crown land without adequate notice to this House and to the people. Mr. Speaker, because we are all afraid that this is going to end up being a done deal in the back rooms, Mr. Speaker, and that is wrong. On behalf of the people that I represent, the people of Halifax Fairview, let me say that this project is not supported. I congratulate the member for Halifax Clayton Park, who's done a great deal to raise the profile of this issue, to make sure the minister knows that he is being watched, and he will not get away with it if he, so to speak, paves the way for the construction of this road in the back rooms of government. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to my colleague from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Honourable Member, and we'll now recognize the member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask how much time I have before we begin so I can keep an eye on the clock here?
You have approximately 7 minutes.
Thank you. Well, it'll be 7 valuable minutes, let me assure you. Because this summer I took the opportunity to knock on the doors surrounding the community where I'm fortunate enough to represent, where we had this wonderful piece of information that has been put together by Chris Miller and Raymond Plourde and other people involved. It's the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lake proposed wilderness area, in which it clearly outlines the reasons why there should be no such thing as this Highway 113. We call it in my community the unlucky Highway 113, and so to be appropriate, I think I should table that document for members opposite so they can see what an important piece of wonderful information that is. And the doors I knocked on those 1 week in the middle of the summer on this issue, to a person, they said, what are we doing building another road in the HRM? We can't take care of the roads we've got now, but now we're going to have another road winding through this pristine wilderness area, and that road and the purpose for that road has never been clearly identified. It's a controversial proposal. It has caused some dissension. In fact, both HRM councillors that I work with have come out in favor of this road. They've come out in favor of it. Meanwhile, Austin French, who held, along with Dave McCusker, held a number of very informative meetings with the regional plan in the Western Halifax County area, and they held them at Halifax West High School, and they held them at the St. Margaret Centre. Austin French has said the 113 is not even on the horizon. But the local HRM councillors are saying that's a road that we should go ahead and build. Now, I mean, those two conflicting interpretations have people scratching their heads and saying, what is exactly the priority here? Well, let me tell you what the priority is. Growing community, moving people around safely, growing community that needs a better transit service. And I know the minister opposite, when he has his time, will understand the fact, I think transit service is what we need. We don't need more roads with more people driving, one to a car, one to a vehicle, one to an SUV as they make their road way into the peninsula of Halifax. That's not what we need. Now, the regional plan has identified throughout the HRM a number of places for growth. And those places tend to be concentrated in the areas Halifax Clayton Park, Timberley Prospect, and those are the concerns that citizens have brought forward. They've brought this forward, and therefore we introduced this resolution so that the minister can clarify the time frame, and finally, of course, that important transfer of Crown land that just must not take place. Because let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, as a young teacher, we had an outdoor education course at the high school and I taught at the time. And one of the most pristine areas that we had where we took these young people on outdoor education adventures was that very piece of land that we're talking about now. That very piece of land where we have come to treasure and value. Now, our concern is very simply this, and I've already seen it in the community of Timberley. There is a connector road that swings off the old St. Margaret's Bay Road, Mr. Speaker. That connector road is not a road into a subdivision. That connector road is of the Dunbrack Street construction. It is a big entrance road that's going to be moving traffic around. Yet, do we have a clear identification why that road suddenly swings off the St. Margaret's Bay Road off into the woods that so conveniently would be meeting where the 113 is? Somebody has to come clean with the communities that we represent. Our communities are concerned with the fact that we are going to lose a pristine part of wilderness so close to the HRM. But in return, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have resulting traffic patterns in a growth community that are just going to be unable to handle. So I think the members opposite who have been on HRM Council and the minister should know, the people in the community that I represent look at the 113 as one reason. It's the way to get the garbage trucks to the landfill site over in Lakeside. That's the reason for that road. That's the reason it's there. That's the reason they're going to move those trucks through there. It's going to be a non-access road. There's going to be no access to it, but the people are just clinging to the fact how many subdivisions are suddenly going to spring off that road. And the argument is it'll save you 6 or 8 minutes coming across the Hammonds Plains Road. Now, the member from Sackville, Upper Hammonds Plains knows, Upper Sackville, Hammonds Plains, if I have it correct, knows, and I know, that has a problem of road congestion. Well, let's improve the Hammonds Plains Road. Let's enforce the fact it's local truck traffic only. We do not need another road that will swing through, spider-like an area that we are so concerned about. Now, Mr. Speaker, the community of Sheldrake Heights is frustrated with this process. And I, having knocked on every one of those doors that hot week in the summer, was received with the fact, finally we're getting some information on this. Finally we're getting the facts. Finally we're seeing where this road proposed, and seems to be some people want it and some don't. I hope the minister understands the frustrations of the people in the communities that we represent. We would like to know exactly what is the future of the 113. Will there be any transfer of Crown land? And if such things take place, the community must be fully involved from the first to understand that they want to be listened to because of the long-term effects that will have on our wonderful community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member, and we'll now recognize the honourable member from Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I wasn't sure if the government was going to reply next or not, but I'd rather put my questions on the table, and hopefully we'll hear from the Minister of Transportation about a number of the concerns that we have around Highway 113. I'm very pleased that a number of the key points have already been raised by members of the official opposition, particularly the length of the highway, which I think is in dispute. Undeniably, there are questions about how that is calculated and whether or not it is not a convenience to have it arrive at 9.9 kilometers rather than a longer distance. And there are very knowledgeable people who have examined it and think it's longer. As we know, the highway is proposed to cut off 7 or 8 minutes of travel time. It will be it cuts 13 kilometers off of driving time or driving distance. But what does it do? What's the cost of that? It's been mentioned that the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes area, which it will intersect completely, bisect, is largely Crown land. It's 1,750 hectares of Crown land. It's important to note that on the positive side, this is the largest piece of Crown land, undisturbed, with no mining, with no logging rights, an unusual state, really, for Crown land in this province, as the Minister of Natural Resources knows. This is a pristine wilderness, and it is the largest piece of wilderness in the HRM urban core. I'd asked for a map to confirm that, and there's no other large piece that falls within the urban core that HRM uses. So this is very important. Not only is it very large and very beautiful, and I have a couple of pictures I'd like to actually table today just to go on the record about how nice looking the area is and how fine it is. We've done a number of walks into the area over the last 2 years to help show people what is there, how beautiful it is, how easy it is to access, and how close to home it is for thousands and thousands of people who live in the HRM. For many people who live in my riding in Clayton Park, you can easily walk to that area. You can go to Kent Building Supplies, and just a few steps behind the what I would have to say is a very unpleasant urban landscape, you can step into a beautiful forest and wilderness. Within about 15 minutes, you come to the shores of Susie's Lake, which is one of the pictures that I have submitted today. Certainly, having that sort of an asset, that sort of a beautiful area close to so many people who live in HRM is tremendously important. And I think what we're looking for here is a balance so that we don't put unnecessary transportation wishes ahead of a vision for our city. And I know that HRM has been looking themselves at their regional plan and how we can proceed with this area, but it's very important to recognize that we need to have some foresight and some vision. This requires imagining what Halifax would have been like if years and years ago people didn't decide that they would preserve Point Pleasant Park. When there was lots of open space on the peninsula, somebody made that decision, more than 100 years ago, that would become a park. That's become a treasure for this city. The same can be said for the mainland north area. You may think this is a wilderness that's out of sight, out of mind. Well, it isn't. It's well known to the people of mainland north now and to the people in Hammonds Plains, and I think it offers tremendous future value. We can talk about it recreationally, health and fitness, environmental values, the quality of life for this city many years to come. Imagine 50 years to come when all of the private land in that area, and it is interspersed with private land, imagine that fully developed and filled out. but you'll still have 1,750 hectares that are preserved, that are a habitat for wildlife and a place for the people of this city to enjoy. And I mean from all over the city. And the first step is to oppose this highway, because the highway will cut right through the middle of these Crown lands. And to carry on the idea of how you're going to secure this corridor, which I understand from a letter that was written by the minister on October 13th, it says Highway 113 is a corridor preservation project only at this time. Well, that's wonderful. It's going to cost us dearly in land for you to preserve this corridor. In order for you to purchase the corridor you're looking for, you can be sure that in the back rooms of Cabinet, you'll be looking at trade-offs that are a lot more than 1 acre for 1 acre. We know how those kind of trade-offs go. So for you to get the corridor that you require to put a four-lane 100 series highway through that land, there'll be the loss of significant Crown lands, lands that are really held in trust for the people of Nova Scotia. And in the Bedford West subdivision alone, I was told by their developer that it will take 100 acres of their land in that subdivision to hold the corridor for Highway 113. And they're developing right now, planning their streets, laying them out. And just in that corner of the highway corridor, they need to reserve 100 acres of land. So we're talking about a significant amount of the land. And I believe any of the Crown lands north of that highway corridor will be sold off in order to preserve your corridor. And somebody should tell the HRM councillors that this is right now a corridor preservation project only, because they're selling it to the people of Hammonds Plains, and probably along with the minister from Hammonds Plains area, that this is the solution to their problems on the Hammonds Plains Road, that this is going to be the saving grace for all of their commuting problems and their traffic congestion, and frankly, the safety issues that they face daily. And this is not, if this plan is really 20 or 25 years out, as Austin French of HRM's regional planning team says, how is this going to help the people of Hammonds Plains? They need help now. They need another alternative. They need somebody to plan this right away so that this doesn't continue to be a charade, which it really is. Obviously, if I lived there, I'd be looking for an immediate solution too. And I've sat down one-on-one with the councillor for the Hammonds Plains area, and he's told me that he thinks that you'll move faster, that this is the answer. Well, he's selling the people out there a bill of goods. And I told him that he'd love to sell them on the idea that this will be taken care of by the province. That number one, it won't cost the city anything, will it, if the province wants to spend that money? Now, I've suggested it would cost up to $50 million to build this highway. I think the last estimate was $30 million done in 1997, and that estimate has been confirmed in correspondence with the department. The cost of building roads has increased greatly. So I think we're talking about a $50 to $60 million highway that's going to do absolutely nothing to improve the quality of life here in HRM. It's not designed to take the commuter traffic off the Hammonds Plains Road. It's designed to move the trucks from the South Shore to Truro and points beyond. It's a transportation corridor for trucks and moving goods as far as I can see. And already trucks are not allowed on the Hammonds Plains Road, so how is this going to help? Now, I have to give you a little history if time allows. Can you tell me how much time I have left, Mr. Speaker?
Member, you have approximately 3 minutes.
Very good. Then there's time to explain this. This project has been on the go, I know, for many, many years, and you'll undoubtedly tell me it was on the go when there was a Liberal government. But the original plan for this highway was to provide a shortcut, which it is, to provide a shortcut that would turn off the 103 much sooner than the Hammonds Plains Road, not after it. And it would have gone behind where the Sobeys and Tantallon Centre is today. It would have cut across those lands over towards Sackville. It would have joined up with the 101 near Sackville or in that area. As time went by, that corridor was lost. It's true that the government of the day didn't reserve the corridor, development took place, and you lost the opportunity. Well, I'm sorry, I don't think that moving it many kilometers closer to the city, making it only a 13-kilometer shortcut, saving 7 or 8 minutes of travel time, is the answer now. I think that the opportunity was lost years ago, and this project should be shelved completely. As I say, the cost to the public in terms of environmental degradation in that area increased congestion, more development. I have to say, in the environmental assessment that's been done up to this point, there was actually the suggestion that this major highway was going to create a buffer for future development, that would preserve the Crown lands in some way. Everybody knows that when you build a highway, you increase the value of the roads or the lands on either side of that road immeasurably. And as the value goes up, the temptation to sell it, to provide money for other projects becomes greater. This land will be eaten up if that highway goes through. And the Crown land, as I say, in its entirety is valuable. As you start to chew it up, as you put it into little tiny ecosystems, it's going to be an absolute waste. What we're calling on here is for the government to show the vision and the foresight to look beyond this immediate idea that you're fixing something. You're not fixing anything. It should be mentioned that by building this highway, you'll create the same problem on the St. Margaret's Bay Road that you currently have on the Hammonds Plains Road. The department's own traffic analysis shows a 200% increase in traffic on the St. Margaret's Bay Road if this highway goes through. Now, how can that be justified within the corridors of HRM or here in the legislature? I'd say that is not planning at all. We have a golden opportunity to preserve this land and look to the future, and I am calling on the government to look at this with new eyes and to look at it as the opportunity that it is, a chance to preserve something very valuable for the health and well-being of the citizens of HRM, and in fact as a jewel for the entire province. And these lands should be protected under the Wilderness Protection Act. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. We'll now recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be sharing my time with the Minister of Transportation. I want to start out by referring back to what the last member had just said, the member from Clayton Park. Imagine what our city would look like without Point Pleasant Park and without McNabb's Island. What I would say, imagine what our city would be like without Bicentennial Highway and the Burnside Bypass and Dunbrack Street. It's exactly the same thing. Our city would be in